Hi there, I'm Lillian. Welcome to my channel. Here I help Christian wives heal their femininity so they can stop thinking like sons of God and start embodying their lives like His daughters. I talk about my own journey and how healing my feminine heart led me to the discovery that I was married to a type 3 man. That's the type of man that's a Nabal. If you don't know if you're married to a type 1, 2, or a 3 husband, you can find a link for that in the description box. Do you want to learn how to understand God's Word as a woman, heal yourself by His sanctification, and possibly transform your marriage by faith and knowledge? Then this is the place for you. Hey lovely sister, I'm so glad to have you back. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm honored that you've stopped in to join us. Whether you've been following here for a while or are just starting on this journey, I want you to know that you're in a place where your feminine heart is valued. Today I want to share something that's really important and hard to hear. It's the heartbreaking discovery that some of you could have already made, or some of you are in the beginning stages of understanding it. I'm talking about the realization that the man that you married isn't leading your family the way you'd hoped and prayed that a husband would, the way you believed he was going to. The key insights you'll take away from this video include the warning signs of a spiritually misaligned marriage, why it's okay to question if you married the wrong man, the spiritual implications of a husband's neglect, the concept of free will in marriage, why it's okay to retroactively vet a man's character, and the power of feminine response. You know, dating advice can have good warnings for sisters, and it can be helpful if they're able to hear and truly understand the deeper meaning behind the advice. It's the same with pre-marriage counseling. It's only beneficial to you if you're able to understand the implications for marriage and for yourself. What I mean by that is you can know a thing, yet not really know it. Like with me. I knew my parents were alcoholics, but I had no idea what that meant to me, the implications and effect that was going to be on my life. So with dating advice or pre-marriage counseling, it can be valuable in warning sisters about potential red flags in men. But more often than not, it's not the comprehensive guidance needed to navigate choosing a man. You can randomly teach what red flags are, but without context, personal context, the broken-hearted lambs, those of us who are unhealed, we have no idea what those red flags really mean. Quite often you get told the simplistic, obvious basics. Avoid the man who isn't pursuing Christ by reading the Bible or praying. Or if he's not involved in a home group or any kind of ministry that serves others. Or if your family and friends don't like him, pay attention to that. If he's negative and critical and selfish, if he lacks healthy relationships or uses substances like drugs or alcohol, those are all red flags. Well, at the risk of sounding too cheeky or overly sarcastic, thank you, Captain Obvious. This advice is so simplistic that it's almost offensive. See, the reality is far more nuanced because the truth can be hidden. A man who's got things to hide, he doesn't reveal that kind of intel before marriage. No man is likely to admit to a severe porn addiction to his possible future bride, or any kind of porn addiction for that matter. If he's professing to be a Christian, he won't show you overt disinterest in spiritual growth. He's not going to confess that he doesn't have any friends because he's impatient, manipulative, or controlling. And he's not going to tell you that he's stingy with his time and money and that he only gives when he has to, like paying taxes. Instead, these truths remain concealed and without deeper discernment, which broken-hearted lambs do not possess. These are the truths that are almost impossible to uncover before marriage. With premarital counseling and most marriage books, there's no advice that's tailored for daughters to spot the wolves and goats and tares within the flock, which I find kind of baffling because the apostles wrote frequently to warn us about this very subject. Instead of giving sisters the necessary tools to navigate the landscape of finding a husband, we're encouraged to not judge him. If he says he's a Christian, he is. There's no need to judge him further. The common teaching is to accept that, hey, we're all sinners. It's just that everyone sins differently. Sounds about right, doesn't it? It's not. This everybody sins idea is a misinterpretation of Romans 3, verse 23, that says everyone has sinned and falls short of the glory of God. This is called sin leveling, and it's how wolves, goats, and tares hide. Because wolves don't look like wolves, and goats don't look like goats, and tares don't look like tares either. They all intentionally blend so that they look like they belong. In evangelicalism, sin leveling is highly promoted, especially within marriage, and it's the number one way a wolf can stay so well hidden. The mentality of sin leveling is how Christian leadership has been enabling and even inviting loads of intimate abusers into their fellowships. I've included some links in the description box for sin leveling if you're interested in delving deeper into that. There's clearly important aspects missing from the current structure of most premarital advice and marriage counseling, especially when it comes to our ability to interpret the information from it. For me, it was like after I was married, I started gathering these puzzle pieces. We wives don't do it on purpose. In fact, we don't even realize that we're doing it. Because of how God designed estrogen, women naturally have a holistic worldview, which is very different from the compartmentalized way men experience life because of their testosterone. While men often process things in separate, organized boxes, we women are hyper aware of everything in our environment. Everything. We're constantly picking up signals from every direction. So we've got these puzzle pieces, and as months turn into years, they're accumulating. But the thing is, we don't know how they fit together, so we can't see the picture because we don't know that they're supposed to go together. You know what those puzzle pieces are? They're questions. Questions we're not allowed to ask or not supposed to ask because it'll make you look disrespectful. Questions we're not supposed to talk about or even think about because it will make you look nitpicky and contentious. Questions about things we've observed but aren't supposed to have noticed or even given any consideration to because you'll look judgmental and selfish. Yet, there they are, all the signals, sitting in our hands as tangible and real as physical puzzle pieces. Wives who are married to the wrong man, they've got those puzzle pieces in their hands, but they don't know that that's what it means. As an older sister in Christ, I want to give you permission, here, in this space, to ponder on the unthinkable, to verbalize those questions that feel so off limits. Questions and queries and observations that just don't make sense to you. Could it be that I did marry the wrong man? How did I marry the wrong man? I know these are hard questions to wrestle with because we've been conditioned to shut all that down. And that's why I want to explore it with you today. Let me begin by saying there's absolutely nothing wrong with an inquisitive, observant mind. If healing is the first step to becoming a shrewd wife, which I believe it is, then an observant and curious mind that questions is what will naturally follow healing. Proverbs 2 verses 3 through 5, James 1 verse 5, and Matthew 7 verses 7 through 8. We're supposed to wrestle, just like Jacob wrestled with God. Genesis 32:28. We aren't supposed to simply accept the status quo in our marriages. Our wrestling, like Jacob's, it's about looking for clarity by asking those deep whys and hows. This process of questioning, it's a process of not settling. It's how we peel back layers and get closer and closer to the truth, whatever that truth happens to be. Wrestling with God is your sanctification journey. Philippians 1 verse 6, 2 Corinthians 3 verse 8, and Romans 8:29. So, yes, you are allowed to ask, what if I married the wrong man? You are allowed to ask, how did this happen? And you're allowed to keep asking, why? The more you wrestle with the whys and hows, the more truth will begin to emerge. Think of it as peeling back layers to reveal what God's bringing to the surface, just like he did with Jacob. Jacob's alone at night, and a man comes and wrestles with him all night. Jacob realizes that he's wrestling with a divine being, and he refuses to let go until he gets a blessing. It was Jacob's perseverance in wrestling that didn't just mark his transformation, but it was also a turning point in his relationship with God. As we dive in, I want to explore some of these hard questions and the unspoken parts of marriage that often get overlooked. I'm going to start us off by diving right into the deep end. What happens after I've already married him? What about the reality that some things might have been intentionally hidden from you? What about the man who changes after marriage, who becomes distant or harsh or manipulative and controlling after you've already said the vows? What happens if, in the beginning, it was all so intense, so fast, both of you seemed fully invested, pouring yourselves in, and it felt real? You thought you were marrying someone different, someone other than who your husband is now showing up as in the marriage. What happens when the marriage becomes worse than imagined? I'm not talking about the traditional colloquial sentiment that says for better, for worse. I'm talking about a marriage that's moving way beyond the worse. Is it too late for you after you've become a wife and you discover you're married to a wolf, a goat, or a tear? No, absolutely not. Something I hear from wives a lot, and I come across this so often in forums. It's the same story with different wives who have the same problems with different husbands. I know the scenario because I walked with a wolf who happened to wear multiple different masks for almost 34 years. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You marry a Christian man who says he was raised in a Christian home. So because he professed that he was a Christian, you believed he was. But as the years have started to roll by, sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes 10 or more, it's not panning out the way you'd imagined that a Christian marriage would. Is that how you feel? Remember, you've got permission to reflect on that. Do you ever feel like the weight you're shouldering spiritually and practically is increasing? Is your marriage as you believed it would be? Or do you sense a widening gap between the man he appeared to be and the man he is now showing up as? Tell me if you can identify. He doesn't initiate any kind of prayer life between the two of you. It's always you. He doesn't request prayer for himself for anything specific. So you take it upon yourself to pray for the areas that you think he needs to grow or change in. He doesn't initiate conversations about God or your shared spirituality and faith. So you intentionally initiate those discussions. He's not purposeful about finding other believers for community. It's always you looking for friends in hopes that they'll suit the both of you. He's not involved with the kids in any intentional way to impart spiritual knowledge or guidance to them, but only at your prompting or even pleading sometimes. He doesn't intentionally plan dates with you or initiate time together to grow your friendship with each other. He doesn't prioritize your life into his schedule as a couple. Like, he doesn't plan any kinds of dates or events that require forethought and consideration of the time management for the both of you. Not like he did before marriage. He's not striving to make himself a better man, a better husband, or a better provider for the family as the head in the relationship. I don't mean money when I say provider, although I'm not excluding that. A true masculine provider is an investor. He has the capacity to provide whatever his family needs, whatever his partner in marriage needs, and whatever femininity needs from his masculinity. God made sure a man would have enough providing power by loading his body up with testosterone. Does it feel like your husband uses his testosterone for all his God-given responsibilities? Or is he using it all for himself? If you allow yourself to reflect on the way he relates to you, your family, and faith, does it feel like he truly embodies the role he led you to believe that he would fulfill? What's happening to these particular wives, the ones who have married the wrong men? Over the years, it's their faith that's growing significantly, and they're surpassing their husbands. It's really not that hard to do. When a man chooses to remain stagnant in his spiritual journey, when he chooses to invest in himself instead of those around him, God doesn't reward that, and as a result, his relationship with his Creator shrivels as his family starves emotionally, mentally, and maybe even physically from his lack of provision. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. Many wives want to submit to their husband's leadership, but how can you follow when there's no demonstration of leadership? You can't. How can your femininity receive when there's nothing being initiated towards you from masculinity so that you can respond in the relationship? You can't. The only option you're left with is going through the motions of the procedures of marriage and the functions of family day after day. And that doesn't just exhaust your body. Your heart and soul get exhausted too. And that's why it gets more painful with every year that passes. When you're alone, just you and God, and your heart is exposed to Him, do you wonder if your husband's lack of leadership and spiritual growth might be a sign that your initial hopes were maybe shaped more by optimism for marriage than by the truth of who your husband really is? This is a hard consideration, and it's one we resist with a lot of force because we do not want to face it. What if the reason your husband isn't stepping into his spiritual leadership role is because he doesn't actually have the heart for it? That's a hard truth to face and accept, but it's one you can't afford, spiritually afford to ignore. You know, most other marriage advice tells you, yes, you can fix your marriage. Yes, you can encourage him to be better, to do better. Yes, you can get him to change. All you have to do is do more of this, or do more of that, or do more of the other thing. Their advice is always about doing more. That's not the perspective I come from here on this channel. I believe the answer lies in doing less and being more. Do I want marriages to be healed? Of course. All marriages, especially kingdom marriages. But with the reality of what I've walked through and what I've experienced, and now what I'm experiencing with Christian wives, is that a lot of them, it seems like, have married a type 2 husband or a type 3 man instead of the type 1 husband that they'd dreamed about and prayed for. When you think back on what you believed about his commitment or what you thought his promises meant, does it feel like his actions align with the qualities of the Boaz type? Or is there something that suggests he might just not have the same vision for your marriage that you do? The type 1 husband is what I call the Boaz type. But what you're finding out now after marriage, it's that he's not. What you're finding out is that you've married a type 2 husband or the type 3 man. You'll notice I make a differentiation between a type 2 husband and a type 3 man, because the type 3 man is not a real husband. He's a toxic man who pretends that he's a husband. That's why I refer to him as the Nabal archetype. If you want to learn more about the Nabal archetype, I've included a video in the iCards where I go into more detail about the 3 different kinds of husbands. So maybe you were given the impression that he would lead your family and the marriage spiritually and invest in the relationship. But now his actions are showing you something really different. When a man leans on his wife to handle his business from God, things like church attendance and running the family, and he even resists her open request to step into his responsibilities, he's revealing something disturbing about himself. Do you wonder if his view of marriage truly reflects what God intended? Or was he looking for someone to simply fill certain roles and functions? Is it possible that his focus was on marrying a woman to meet those duties and wants, rather than a desire to experience an authentic, true friendship with a female? You might be starting to realize that his purpose and meaning behind marriage feels completely different from yours. When God said a man who finds a wife finds a good thing, it's a statement that's rich and deep with eternal meaning. It's about creating a new living entity with God at the center. But what you're beginning to see is that for him, this good thing has got a really different meaning. For you, a good thing means a relationship grounded in mutual growth, love, and moreover, a faith that's shared between a brother and sister. For you, the meaning is eternal. But for him, the good thing focuses on temporal needs and wants instead of eternity. It's all about earthly service to him, meeting his needs, and keeping things running smoothly in the marriage and the house. God didn't design marriage as a way for a man to find someone who would shoulder all the responsibilities and tasks so he could be served. That's not why God says marriage is a good thing for a man. Could it be that from the beginning, your husband's definition of what makes a wife good was rooted in the desire to have a partner that would fulfill his responsibility more than a desire to cultivate a true spiritual connection at the deepest level? God designed a man in such a particular way so that he would actively lead in the roles of marriage, and he equipped him with enough masculinity to be the source for femininity in the relationship. But if he's not intentionally pursuing all those spheres, marriage and family and the one flesh relationship, it could be because it's not in his heart the way he led you to believe that it was. How would it feel to release the burden of doing more to try and get him to change, and instead allow yourself to see and accept his actions as they are? Here's the reality. You can tell a man what's expected of him. You can even perfectly frame a request of what you need. But if he isn't acting on it, it reveals his true desire. When his actions don't align with his words, he's already shown you what he's willing to contribute and what he's not willing to contribute. I heard Jordan Peterson say, and I'm going to paraphrase it here, if you want to understand someone's intent, just look at the outcome of what they've done, or relative to the subject matter of marriage that we're talking about, what they haven't done. Notice the word isn't judge. He didn't say if you want to judge someone's intent. He said if you want to understand someone's intent. In fairness, that's true of women too, but not to the degree it is with men. Men are action-oriented creatures because of the high levels of testosterone in their bodies. So understanding a man's heart and mind more often than not will come through his activity, not words. By observing the patterns of his actions, intention becomes visible through the outcomes he produces. When you think about your husband's actions over time, do patterns begin to emerge? Knowing that men are action-oriented creatures, what might his consistent actions or consistent lack of action be showing you about his perspective on marriage? Is it possible that in the beginning there were signs you missed or overlooked because you were hopeful, or maybe you didn't realize the depth of what was required of a spiritual leader? Now his actions are telling you what's really going on. He's not taking up the mantle of leadership because he doesn't want it, and maybe he never did. You know, though, it's never too late for you to start living the way God intended. When God created you, he created you to be a daughter, not a son. But for whatever reason, you've been relating in masculinity instead of embodying your feminine nature. Maybe no one taught you about your femininity when you were a little girl, or maybe you didn't realize there was another way to relate in your marriage. There could even be trauma in your past or emotional bruising that's clouding your ability to embrace your femininity. Luke 4:18-19. But it's never too late for God to heal you. As you consider your own journey, have you felt as though you've been carrying a weight that doesn't align with the feminine heart God created in you? What would it look like to put it down and redirect all your focus by stepping into the healing and wholeness that God has for you? The good news is that just like your husband's actions changed after marriage, so can yours. You're here today searching for solutions on this particular video. That's not a coincidence. It's evidence of God's providence over your life and all the days that he ordained for you. Psalm 139, verse 16. He's calling you to step into his timing because he knows exactly where you are in this process. He knows exactly what's going on in your marriage. Your husband has shown that it's quite possible to change after marriage because that's what he did. He was one way when you married him, and now he's a different way, and not for the better. So you can change after marriage too, but the change you're going to bring to the marriage is wholeness. That's going to come through healing and strengthening and embodying the truth of your feminine heart. Healing is the major key to exposing the reality of what your marriage is like. Your actions that are rooted in healing, they'll be a mirror that speaks with power that's found in the feminine response instead of words. Proverbs 21:19. What could it mean for you and your marriage if instead of striving through words, you allowed your feminine heart to respond from a place of wholeness? How could your actions deliver the truth in a way words never could? The more you step into the identity God gave you, which is your true self, the more the kind of man you're married to will surface. It can only be that way because that's the purpose of femininity in the one flesh relationship. The only person God gave you authority over was yourself. You don't have the power to make someone be someone they don't want to be. We don't get to choose that for other people. That includes marriage. You both have free will. Neither of you lost it when you got married. There's a weight that gets added to the couple in the form of the roles of husband and wife. But roles don't replace the responsibility of masculinity and femininity in a one-flesh relationship. Marriage isn't an exchange program that swaps out personal stewardship or relationship responsibility for the function of the roles. Marriage is a plan of increase, particularly for the man. It's designed to add value to each person, since it brings so much more to a man than a woman. And that's why God says a wife is a good thing for him. It's really interesting to note that God doesn't balance the proverb by saying it's a good thing for a woman who finds a husband. You cannot make a man grow into a role that he hasn't prepared himself to do. And you can't make him want the responsibility of headship if his heart isn't there. Does it feel like you're waiting for him to step into something he never really wanted in the first place? How would it change things if you accepted that headship has got to come from his desire to invest into you? This is why I want to suggest that, is it possible that he doesn't share the same heart for God's design in marriage that you do? He could have gotten married because he was overly focused on its benefits, without ever really understanding or wanting the responsibility that goes along with those benefits. More and more, you feel like you're settling for merely performing the role of the wife, rather than living as a fully embodied feminine woman in a relationship with a masculine man. Inside your heart, there's an ache, like a disillusionment that comes from an unsettling feeling that your husband values your abilities as a wife more than he cherishes your heart, mind, and soul. It feels like he's fixating on what you can accomplish with your talents of wiffery, rather than pursuing you and connecting with the woman who you are at your core. Your individual personality, your identity as a daughter of God, the femininity that defines you, that all feels ignored. Even in the natural realm, you sense that your unique worth is unseen. And spiritually, as a sister and brother sharing the same faith, it feels like he overlooks the value of that deeper connection. Doing the role of the wife may be the only part of you he sees, except of course when it comes to sex. Could it be that he values what you do for him more than who you are to him? And if so, what could that reveal about the nature of your relationship? When you allow your emotions to come to the surface, does it feel as though he married a role rather than a person? Instead of stepping into his responsibility of headship by providing himself as the source for a woman, he's more concerned with what you can do for him than what he could ever bring to you. That's a bad blend in a man, to want all the perks without any of the works. That means he married you for your skill set as a wife, domestics, and sex. It sounds horrible, doesn't it? And that brings me to a very real question. What if he's not just spiritually immature or wounded and dysfunctional? What if he's not spiritually aligned with you at all? I know that's a hard pill to swallow, but if he's repeatedly resisting leadership of your family and within the marriage, and consistently rejecting the responsibility of headship, it could be because he doesn't have the same foundation of belief that you do. Maybe you thought he did. Maybe you were even led to believe that he did. But now, after you've been married for a while, his actions are revealing something different. Could his resistance be revealing a deeper misalignment, one that goes beyond personality and reaches into spiritual conviction? And if so, what does this mean for your journey together? I know that's such a scary thing to think about because, look, the realization itself that you're considering accepting even the possibility of that realization. It means you may have chosen a husband whose beliefs don't align with yours, and that brings an uncertainty that's, well, it's devastating. That means you're faced with a decision. What are you going to do about it? Because you still have your free will too. Sister, I know how scary it is because I faced the same decision. You can't go backwards into the past, yet in the present, you're experiencing so much pain that's just been increasing with each year, and you feel stuck, frozen in emptiness. And the thoughts of living the next 30 or 40 years immobilized in this emotional wasteland, it's gut-wrenching. It's as though God's revealing your femininity to you through her pain. It's because of that you're now able to see that there's a stark contrast in your relationship that you couldn't see until now. The weight that we feel from free will is because God could have intervened earlier, but his timing is perfect, and he's allowed you to reach this understanding at this moment in your life for a purpose. Your femininity is the critical factor here. It's the part of you that can inspire healing in a man if he wants the responsibility of headship, or in an equally powerful way, your healed femininity will drive away a husband who, by all his resistance, is revealing that he's a wolf. The reality is that we all marry the wrong person in one way or another. The question to ask is, how are they wrong for you? Not in a judgmental way, but in an analyzing way with observation and curiosity. Have you considered that the sense of something being wrong in your marriage might not be about judgment, but rather a reflection of a deeper misalignment between darkness and light? It's really not as simple as saying, okay, we're both Christians, so we can get married. Easy peasy. Now we're equally yoked. It's not as elemental as just because you've got the same faith on paper, you're going to be guaranteed a formula that magically creates the one flesh dynamic, or at the very least, a smooth ride. Just because the man you married possessed a belief in Jesus doesn't mean he's in the same place as you on his sanctification journey. If a meat eater marries a milky Christian, there's going to be a one-sidedness in the relationship. Hebrews 5, verses 12 through 14. The imagery of someone who's got the ability to handle solid food contrasted with a basic, simple substance of milk gives us a great application for marriage. Being married to a man puts his faith walk on display. Does it feel like there's an imbalance in how you both understand and prioritize your faith? How does this difference affect your ability to walk together in unity? A daughter of God who's been growing in spiritual maturity and discernment by wrestling with him in her sanctification is going to feel unfulfilled in a marriage to a son who remains in the infancy stage. There's going to be conflict and nagging and complaining and pressure that continues to creep into every part of the marriage. In Christian circles, you often hear the term equally yoked like it's the be-all and end-all of choosing a husband. But being equally yoked goes way beyond merely sharing the same faith label. It involves a spiritual compatibility as well as a self-awareness in the natural realm. And there's got to be a shared hunger for more and a commitment to support each other as a sister and brother with the same Heavenly Father. Do you sense that there's a shared hunger and commitment as you're walking together toward God? Or do you feel that you're pulling him along? Another thing is that In Matthew 7, verses 22 through 23, God warns us that not everyone who claims to know Jesus genuinely follows him with a heart of surrender and obedience to him as the Lord of their lives. This is why I want to talk about vetting. A lot of us find ourselves in these kinds of situations in our marriages, situations that are really just becoming more desperate because we didn't know how to properly vet a man. Any man, but especially one we were considering marriage with. Did you marry the wrong guy? Or did you marry him because he seemed like the right guy, only to find out after the wedding that he was wrong for you? What happened? Are you now stuck? It's not that you were negligent. You didn't know. You weren't taught how crucial it is to look beyond the words and promises to see if there was a deeper spiritual alignment between the two of you. As you look back, do you think there may have been signs or questions left unasked? How would this information now help guide the way you approach marriage today? A lot of sisters, and I'm including myself here, we chose a husband based on the effects of a broken heart. And by a broken heart, I don't mean a sinful or doing bad things. I mean unhealed. When Jesus said he came to heal the brokenhearted in Luke 4, verse 18, he doesn't mean saved or unsaved. It's not about actions or any kind of manifested behaviors. Brokenhearted means unput together. Not like something or someone you've lost. Not like grieving. Not like grieving something that was once within your possession. Say you were sighted and then at the age of 25 you lost your vision. That's not the kind of loss that means brokenhearted. In order to grieve the loss of something or someone, you had to have been in possession of that thing in the first place. In this example, brokenhearted means never having had the ability to even open your eyes in the first place, so you don't know what vision even is. I'm talking about the healing of brokenheartedness that only the Holy Spirit can do. Only He can unscramble the mess of a soul and restore it to its intended created design. Does it feel like some of your choices in life may have come from an unhealed place? Could it be that God is using this moment, even the pain in a marriage, to open your eyes in a way that you hadn't experienced before? There's a simple message that Christian women are told either directly or by an unspoken subtlety. That message is that a good man can be found within the walls of a church. But the reality is that a masculinity that's toxic, some of the most harmful men go to church as a strategy. They know that by being present there, that there's a kind of optics that's projected by them sitting in a church pew and holding a Bible. This is the imagery that beguiles broken-hearted women. It masks and charms the emptiness where feminine awareness and discernment typically reside. Does it resonate with you that a man's private life outside of church is more likely to reveal the truth of his heart? What is it that you're able to observe now after marriage that could show you more about who your husband truly is? There's also an idea that's projected across churches that, and again, it's not verbalized, but it's like an unspoken acceptance that everyone gathered in that auditorium or sanctuary or class or small group or event is safe and saved. We're warned about dangers out there in the world, but no one really talks about and warns the brokenhearted lambs that danger can be within the group we're sitting with. It can be sitting right beside you. If there's a sermon on wolves, goats, or tares, which is rare, our attention is led to look outside the church walls at the world of unbelievers. The obvious implication being that everyone inside a church is a believer. Even though all the teachings in the Bible that talk about wolves, goats, and tares are specifically talking about false believers inside the church. Broken-hearted women believe those projections. We get lulled into trusting too easily and fast because we've let our guard down instead of testing and judging like God says in 1 John 4. Do you find yourself second-guessing if perhaps there were blind spots in how you approached certain dating relationships before marriage? There's this masculine way of thinking that says if you just sit a woman down and tell her the do's and don'ts of vetting, she'll miraculously be able to choose the right man. And for a son of God, that method of instruction works, coming from a man to instruct another man. But femininity doesn't learn how to choose a husband by a list of dating rules or red flags or shoulds and should nots. That's linear masculine thinking, and it's so constricting for femininity. Our perception is holistic and organic. We don't approach relationships through straight lines and boxes. Masculine thinking isn't just ineffective for a feminine creature when it comes to relationships. It's downright dangerous for some of us. Can you recall experiences in your marriage that have pressured you to think and assess in a way that doesn't feel natural to your heart? What would it have looked like to have listened to your feminine intuition in those situations? Think about when David took down Goliath in 1 Samuel 17. Saul wanted David to wear his armor and use his weapons, but they wouldn't work for David because he wasn't that kind of warrior. Men and women are different kinds of humans, so doesn't it make sense that how we intuit life and relationships is also going to be different? We need to learn within the framework of our own feminine design. And when we don't understand that, and when no older woman has taught us these feminine skills, then out of ignorance, we completely skip the vetting process, which is imperative to our mental and emotional health. That's how we end up in marriages where a husband doesn't share the same foundational faith, and maybe you get stuck for years like I did, for many years, trying desperately to unite light with darkness. If you could go back, how would you approach marriage and faith differently? And now, knowing what you know, how can you apply this perspective to the journey that lies ahead? I want to tread carefully here. This isn't about blame, and it's not about regret. It's about seeing the truth for what it is and accepting it as your reality. Maybe he's not wounded and dysfunctional, or not just slow to grow spiritually. Maybe he's not on the same path as you at all. And if that's the case, you're not alone in this realization. Trust me. Many of us daughters are finding ourselves waking up one day and realizing we married someone who doesn't share the same faith, like we thought they did. But here's the good news. You're not stuck in despair. You're still loved by God, and He's got a plan for you, even in this ugly and painful and scary situation. Matthew 10:36. You can still make a decision, even after marriage. But this decision isn't about getting your husband to change. Instead, the purpose of vetting him now is to observe how he's going to respond to your newfound femininity as you grow and embrace who God made you to be. In marriage, it's not your responsibility to teach the head how to do headship things. God never asks His daughters to raise up His sons into who they should be. It's too big of a burden to take on. It's a God-sized burden. And if you try and do that, it will take everything you've got and everything you don't have. You'll be left feeling more depleted and more helpless. Have you been feeling the weight that comes with taking responsibility for the choices of your husband or trying to guide his choices? What would it look like to release that burden and trust God with his journey? If he doesn't want to step into the role of leadership and assume responsibility for headship, that's his free choice to make. This is a freedom given by God. It's a gift, but it's also a burden, and it comes with realities that can't be avoided. The first reality is that although your husband can freely choose his actions, he doesn't get to choose different consequences other than what would naturally follow those choices. In the parable of the talents found in Matthew 25, the servant who buried his talent ultimately faced loss. God's design is such that when you take ownership, it'll bring growth and reward, but abdicating responsibility and avoiding the roles you were meant to fulfill, that leads to forfeiting your own blessings. When a husband doesn't step into his role as the source of provision and protection, he's essentially hiding the talent of his masculinity from his wife. Masculinity was designed by God to be a source that feeds, shelters, and contributes to a woman's femininity, not just in material ways, but also with emotional and spiritual investments. When this provision is withheld, a wife's heart lacks the masculine source that was meant to empower her femininity with affection and love. God intended this provision for her well-being in the one-flesh relationship. She can't flourish without it, at least not in the relationship dynamic. When you think about God's design for masculinity, does it feel like your husband's investments into the relationship has been hidden from you? Without this dynamic energy exchange between masculinity and femininity, the blessing is forfeited. When this kind of neglect happens, a wife who's brokenhearted, she'll feel compelled to fill that void. She ends up taking on the weight of headship because she's been told that it's her responsibility to serve as a helper and to work at restoring what's missing in the marriage. She's been taught wrongly that by stepping in, she's got the power to bring the marriage into a healthy place. And she does, but that's not how it happens. It doesn't happen by her neglecting the stewardship of her own femininity to do the responsibility of his masculinity. And this approach leads to both of them missing the interdependent dynamic that God intended to exist between the sexes. Does it feel like you're stepping into your husband's role, hoping it will create health in the marriage? When a wife assumes the responsibility of the head as well as the body, she ends up sacrificing her own femininity. She ends up working harder and harder at the marriage instead of accepting the reality of the man she's married to. And this is how you end up trapping yourself in a cycle of unmet needs and unfulfilled hopes. Proverbs 13:12. And it's like you get stuck in this cycle because the primary driver of your body is estrogen, and that means your focus is relationship. But the problem is that God didn't design you with the level of testosterone needed to provide for your self-care and the man's. You've only got 10% of the testosterone that he has. It's just enough for your own self-care. That's why your husband's masculinity was designed to invest his strength and support into yours. If that's not happening, don't think that God's left you stranded, helpless in a hopeless marriage. I admit, though, it does feel like that. But things aren't always what you think they are. In fact, when it comes to God, things very rarely are what they seem. Isaiah 55, verses 8 through 9. Even though your husband's choosing to forfeit his portion of the blessing found in the one flesh relationship, God is steadfast, right? His heart toward you will not withhold the security and love you need. In fact, your relationship with God as his beloved daughter will be increased as he draws you closer to himself and provides for your heart. As his daughter, you'll experience the deep reassurance of his presence, which fills the emptiness that's being left by the negligence from your husband. This is truth and not true at the same time. There was a repeated pattern of advice that I heard so many times. It sounded like what I had just said. It told me that when my marriage is hurting and hopeless, that I have to let God fill that empty spot where your husband falls short. But what this advice was actually implying was that I should treat my husband like he's not falling short of his responsibilities, and that I should respond as though he is loving me like I'm part of his own body. That I should treat him as though he is honoring God's command toward me, and let God pick up the slack for a husband who's not fulfilling his command. This is bad counsel for wives. It encourages us to enable a husband's disobedience to God's command. And then the wives, end up forfeiting their own obedience to God. In fact, if you follow this counsel, you know what you're doing? You're aligning yourself with your husband's sin, just like Sapphira did. And before you know it, you'll be participating in a deception that dishonors God. Instead of responsible stewardship, Sapphira agreed with Ananias' sin against God. Acts 5, verses 1 through 11. You know what's really interesting about Sapphira and Ananias? They didn't go to meet Peter together. Like, they didn't go at the same time. Sapphira faced the same judgment as Ananias because she chose to enable his sin instead of distancing herself from it. God set it up so that there was a 3-hour separation of time between her arrival and Ananias. He gave her this time span so that she could redeem herself by stewarding her portion of the money. When you think about enabling sin versus releasing responsibility, how would a loving release of your husband's responsibilities actually align with God's wisdom for your life? This doesn't mean abandoning your husband. That's not what I'm getting at here. It's about releasing him to be who he chooses to be before God while you walk in integrity. Just like Sapphira had the responsibility to step back from her husband's deception instead of leaning into it, wives are called to step away from participation in any of their husband's sins. There's no exceptions, which is the takeaway we learn from Sapphira. This act of releasing him, it's an act of love for your brother so that you don't enable him, but ultimately it's for the love of God as his daughter. It's also the path to true healing. When you release what never belonged to you in the first place, like the responsibility for your husband's choices and actions, God changes the desires of your heart so that they align with his own. So technically, God doesn't fill that empty space that I mentioned earlier. He doesn't fill that so that your husband can continue to sin against you without consequence. Instead, God heals that void by redirecting your focus and priority back to himself, away from your marriage. What has happened in a brokenhearted state is that we allow a kind of misappropriation of power and authority in marriage. And instead of God being the center of our life, whiffery and a husband's behaviors and, well, the whole marriage become the priority above God. That's what happened to Sapphira because she prioritized Ananias above the Holy Spirit. That's got to be a lesson to us. Your husband isn't the priority. God is. Your father-daughter relationship takes precedence over your heart, mind, soul, and body. By putting God back into the top position, the ache inside your heart disappears. And that's the beginning of your healing. Could it be that God is inviting you to a new place of healing by refocusing your heart on Him as His daughter, instead of over-focusing on doing the role of the wife? The second reality is exposure. God is revealing to you everything you need to know about your husband's heart. Proverbs 10 verse 4 says that a deceitful palm brings privation, but the diligent hand enriches. When a husband rejects his God-given responsibility, it reveals his expectations on the marriage and you. What's being revealed is that he thinks he's entitled to receive without the work required to lead well or to assume the weight of responsible headship. But the thing is, God's giving you the clarity to see truth. It's coming to you through your unhappiness and conflict in marriage. And God's not only showing you what your husband is unwilling to do for the marriage, but He's also revealing where his heart truly is regarding the stewardship of his own relationship with God. As painful as this truth may be, and believe me, I know how much it hurts and how hard it is to accept, there's also another thing I know. I know it's so freeing. John 8, verses 31 through 32. The discontentment and dissatisfaction that you feel in your marriage isn't something to ignore or suppress. It's actually your heart recognizing the reality of your relationship with this man. Through this journey, this season of waking up to the reality of what kind of man you're married to, God's goal isn't just to reveal the truth about your marriage, because the larger, more significant focus is about your healing. In conclusion, marriage itself is not inherently hard. Are there times of seasons that test you? For sure, yes. Moments of difficulties, trials, and hardships, they're normal, but they don't define the entire life of your marriage. The idea that marriage can be filled with constant conflict, or what some call struggle love, that comes from a place of brokenheartedness. When you hear phrases like, "we just fight a lot," or "we rarely are able to resolve any conflicts," or "we can't talk about things like that because it creates too much trouble between us," those comments are clear indicators of a deeper unhealed pain, rather than reflections of a healthy marriage that has the occasional trial from time to time. You know, I used to actually believe that every marriage has its own toxic blend, and this just happens to be mine. But that's just not true. Every relationship will have its own unique challenges and opportunities for growth, but there's a significant difference between natural struggles and a marriage filled with neglect, abuse, and being perpetually sinned against. That's not what Paul meant in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 28, when he said those who marry will face troubles. He didn't mean that when you get married, you need to know that you're signing up for a lifetime of enduring emotional and psychological harm, being taken advantage of, or feeling drained and unseen. Paul's words are an acknowledgement that marriage requires sacrifices, and it comes with its own set of trials, but don't confuse these trials with enduring a life of being exploited. When you look at how Jesus and the apostles related to each other, you see a relationship dynamic rooted in acceptance, love, and respect, and support. This dynamic sets the template for our marriages under the new covenant. What's really interesting is that whether you married the wrong man or not, the solution doesn't change. The answer is found in healing and strengthening your heart, soul, and mind so that you can fully embody your femininity. The more your true God-given identity emerges, the clearer the reality of your marriage will become. You'll begin to see the evidence of whether your marriage is built on a foundation of genuine connection and attachment and interdependence, or if it's being held together by unhealthy dynamics and unmet expectations. If your husband is truly the wrong man, someone who isn't saved, like a wolf, a goat, or a tare, your feminine strength will repel him. He'll become uncomfortable and aggravated with your wholeness, not just because you're embodying healing and strength, but more because you're reflecting the image of God in the fullness of who He created you to be. Your wholeness will become a living testament to God's design, and that's something He'll find impossible to ignore. But if He's the right man, your healed femininity will draw him in. You'll be challenging him to rise and to seek his own healing and to become the man who God designed him to be. Your healing isn't just for you. It begins with you. But it's got the power to illuminate the truth of your marriage and inspire change. Ephesians 5:31 through 32. Whether that change is in your husband or in the direction God leads you next. Thank you for watching until the end. Time is our most precious commodity, so thank you for sharing yours in support of this channel. It means a lot to me. If there's a particular part of the video that resonated with you, or if you have something to add to the conversation that will help a sister out, consider yourself invited to share. Every like, every comment and share helps get our message out to more sisters who might need to hear about healing their feminine heart. Bye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.